Um, Good afternoon, evening. Um, so this video is going to be a chapter 1 overview. I'm going to do deep dives in each chapter in video format before the chapter from now on, so you can get like the big context. And this stuff is going to go, it's going to be deep. So like for me to deliver it correctly, I need to be thinking clearly. And for you to receive it correctly, you need to be in a really good listening environment. And frankly, that's in isolation or alone. So you're most clear-headed when you're by yourself, bar none. When you're by yourself thinking about only the thing that you want to think about, that's when your thoughts are most clear. So in terms of teaching this stuff, it's really only possible in a one-on-one situation because the group mind causes a lot of anxiety. And you can kind of do it in small groups or get larger and larger as people hone in on it. But when you're learning this deep stuff at first, like when you're learning anything deeply at first, you have to lock yourself in a room and just focus on the thing entirely. And so, especially at your age and until you get older, once you're older, you're able to hone your attention in as if you were in a room by yourself. But sort of at your age, I need you to pay attention to me at a level that is like genuinely total isolation, to a degree that it's almost uncomfortable. Like it's almost uncomfortable, the level of focus and attention that I want you guys to give me. Some of you have actually been doing it in class, and it's a little crazy when people are actually paying attention to you, right? Things are different when you're actually paying attention, right? So one of the amazing things about technology is that it lets people. This is books are written in total isolation, right? When you're writing. When you go to the top of a mountain, you go to a cave, you go somewhere alone to really get clarity. And so the thing with the clarity that you get when you're alone is it goes away when you're around people. So before video, it's been really hard to bridge those two areas. You have to get one-on-one instruction. It's hard to teach people deeply, right? So with this on the video stuff, we can at least, very least, like you watch the video, this is homework. Like maybe it'll run up to 40 minutes or an hour or something like that each chapter. But you do it at home, you do it alone, focused, by yourself. That's it. Right? I think if you give these videos that hour of focus, that the screen helps you focus. Like we focus on the screen to a ridiculous degree. So it's like, you don't want to be just learning some random Khan Academy, generic cookie cutter stuff. You want an interaction with a real human being. So I think doing the real human being where it's like I'm making the video content will let us access that same level of focus that we can get from videos. Like it does, like the way that you stare at the screen, you'll notice that like very blank mind, right? This is why when they say TV rots the brain and the screens rot the brain, it's because of a sedentariness and inactivity, which is also the plus side of that. You know, everything's good and bad. So the plus side of that inactivity of the screens is that level of inactivity is a high level of stillness. Like if you know how to pay attention to and zone out to a screen and you take a step back from that and you look at what your mind is doing to take in the information of the screen, you'll see that it's becoming hypnotic. There's a certain area in your mind that's totally passive with the screens. You can go ahead and start looking at it, wind the video up, because you'll stop paying attention to the stuff on the screen, right? Pay attention to where it's landing and notice how still you are. Just totally accepting. That's why it's like such a good medium for like programming, good or bad. So it opens up this hypnotic window. Because the degree of the resolution, the more hypnotic the window, the more it looks like reality, the more there's a complete passiveness. So in some sense, then that passiveness causes like a just total going, but like you want to be able to be still. Right, all the greatest athletes and stuff in the world have a stillness practice. So it's like it's kind of interesting that you already have a stillness practice that most people throughout history wouldn't even know how to describe it. It's like one of these marvels that nobody notices. but simultaneously it's a marvel that will cause massive atrophy if you don't know what you're doing. But that's why the level of stillness that you have on these devices, like, yes, is facilitating it, but you're telepathic with all of your friends. You're able to witness this moment right here, remote viewing, right? It lets you, like, this machine unlocks all the powers that absolute stillness unlocks. Like, if you learn how to do this on purpose all the time in every direction, which, if you really wanted to, is not that far away from that cue. It's just you deciding that you want to do that, right? Anyway, so I'm going to use these videos to, like, throw stuff like that into you, and it's going to be, so this stuff's going to be profound. So if I'm doing, so you don't stick to any of that stuff. It's just let it in, woo, let it go. That's nothing to remember. That's just kind of warm up. It's just kind of jostling, right? It's got to be, it's going to become nothing, right? So the other thing is that, so my goal is to be slightly at that level of causing panic, confusion, drowning, right? And for me, it's like, I'm like, yeah, what are you guys talking, like, what's wrong? And it's like, yeah, I'm flooding you at an intellectual level of concepts and asking you to I'm asking the light bulb to turn on. I'm throwing crazy ideas out. I'm acting in an erratic way. I'm giving you models of this, tangents of that, solar system of this, and you're trying to find, like, how the dots connect, and it's like, it's not rational. Just keep staying with it, and eventually you get this intuition of being able to float. All the connections between the ideas will suddenly turn on. This could happen next week, it could happen in a month or two, or it might take an entire year. You don't know. But my goal as a teacher is I'm constantly trying to basically get you to swim intellectually. So for the most part, unless you've really dived into something, like when you really dive into something, you start studying your sport, when you start studying your hobby or whatever you study, you really go into it and you really start to get good. You're in this different realm. You're in the realm of genius, and the genius does not put things together. Genius, it's already together to the degree that, like, a pool is filled, right? And so this is also the breath. So the entirety of my course, or what I'm trying to do, is to actually teach it from the ground up, integrated in with Ha. So it's a big deal in Hawaiian schools, is to promote and uphold the principles of the breath. And so the principles of the breath is the true nature of the breath is interconnected life. It's a continuous interconnected field. So the degree that you're connected to your family, your community, your island, to love, to history, to truth, to facts, the degree that you're connected to those things is the degree that you're breathing. That is actually the breath, actually the life force. And so to actually put that first means that you have to take some relatively, what I think is a radical step of requesting an unreasonable amount of lucidity. Because if you have less than that and you learn science, you can get screwed up. So there's a certain maturity level that comes with science that I don't think people acknowledge. In an ideal situation, I don't know, I might be being old-timey and, like, we're growing up fast and this is just the world the way it is, but the degree to which you're getting saturated with the way culture works, especially the scientific culture, and the belief of, like, we are studying things and we are manipulating objects out there and that's how we're going to do this thing, that has become somewhat unhinged because of an academic dishonesty, right? So science started out with, like, there was an assumption of this interconnectedness of, like, I'm me, but I'm not separate from this. Like, I'm connected to the world, and it's everything in the world is as tied together and meaningful as everything in my body is tied together and meaningful, right? So people automatically saw a telos in the world because you're cognizant or you're aware of your breath, and so you can see that everything is tied together in a pattern that has meaning similar to the meaning that any cell in your body would get if they started studying the pattern around them. they would see the connective tissue or the fascia. As they looked around, there would be energy flowing. You would look out, you could see other cells possibly. You could look into the water maybe, and you would look around and you'd be like, why are things organized this way? Like, why is it like this? And eventually you would find out why everything you saw was like this was because you're looking at, you're inside of something. You're inside of this thing, this purpose. And that's why all the physical laws and everything are the way that they are. All the cells are shaped that way, they're arranged this way, because they're doing this. Right? So we know every culture in the world except for the modern scientific materialist culture, and the reason that we got this way is because we go, okay, let's do science. How do we do science? I have to objectively study that. I'm here and I'm going to study that, and I'm going to figure out the objective truth of this by studying it. Right, and so that goes against the basic tenets of neurology and the study of cognitive science and the sense organs. Like, we know uncontested that the light comes in, it hits receptors on your cells. It hits these little cells in the back of your eyeball and your retina, and they are connected to nerves. And so as light hits those receptor cells, it changes the rate that those nerve cells are firing off nerve impulses, or what's called action potentials. So you have just coaxial cables behind your eyeballs that go into your brain, which is just millions upon millions of wires popping off with electrical explosions at a rate of like something like 3 to 100 times a second or something like that. Just pop, 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 pop. And the nerves are like, they can be long. They can run like the length of your torso. So a lot of them are long. They're actually wires, and they form relays. So your spine's just full of them, thick millions and millions and millions of these wires. And all your sense organs are plugged into this, right? So your skin is a sense organ. You can view it like just a giant eyeball that looks at feeling awareness. Because all of the sensation of the nerves for the skin goes into the nerve cells and then is fed into the central nervous system, and then, sent up and processed, and that turns into the sensation of the body. And all of the photons or whatever's going on with the eyes, it goes in and changes the optic nerve, changes how the brain's firing. So all these nerves are firing at they're firing at a frequency, and as they get stimulated by sensation, that frequency will change. So the sensation is causing frequency modulation in your nervous system. And so it's just waves of energy going back and forth, all kind of tied together and like singing back and forth to each other, like a 1,000 orchestras all trying to jam together, and they kind of is what's going on with the nerves. As they're sending a frequency back and forth, just like bandmates are sending frequencies back and forth. And as stuff happens, they start changing how they're playing. Like, oh, I'm being stimulated, like the tempo goes up. So then the tempo goes up from that, and then that you respond to it, and as you think, it changes the tempo of your nerves firing. So there's these waves and oscillations of firing just fractally stacked. I think I've talked about fractals, but so you've got this information coded just constantly going throughout the nerves. And so when you see things, you're not looking at things. We know because if you cut the optic nerve, your vision of your perception goes away. So everything that you perceive, the vision of it, you know that you're not here looking out of the eyeballs from the story of science. Because if you mess with the nerve, you can mess with certain processing centers. If you mess, the eyes can keep coming in, but if you mess with the nerves anywhere along the blindness, and you can stimulate the nerves in particular ways to cause hallucinations. You can cause visions that aren't there. Or maybe they are there, but they're tied to new sensation. Like you're looking at the nerves. So you know that wherever your observer is, like science has just kind of like left the question of like where or who is the observer, as if we can just like figure it out later. And so the observer is all around anything that you could possibly perceive. It's not just the body. Like the body, like it's definitely the body. Like there's something in the nerves reflecting the body to where this is like intimately tied with my body. Like I'll like cut myself and I'll bleed and I see it and it's true. Like it's true. But we also know that all this is also happening in the same body. Like we know that the environment is happening in the body because it's a perception, and we know that the perceptions are happening in the body. So we know a little bit about that from biology and studying that stuff, but we know at a very basic, simple fact, like we don't know how or what we're looking at, or like how are we decoding that pattern. That's actually kind of crazy, right? We're looking at, we know we're not looking at this, but we see it. Like we know that our awareness is not exactly doing something like looking out these eye windows and seeing. That's only a fragment of what we're actually doing, because all of this is contained in what we're doing. So it's, you start to see this kind of like double toroidal shape, which we see around the planets and the solar system, and you see this energetic pattern at all levels and all scales, because like, of course, because if you're going to start digging into something or looking around and looking for the meaning of the world, it's like as things move around, it's like you know that they're moving in accordance with a telos that is shaped like this. It's kind of human. So if you were awareness more attached to like a frog, the world would have this frog telos to it. The body would shape it. And so it's kind of like you could say there's a telos for each body, right? But there's a human telos or whatever. So you know as you do science, you're kind of pushing out or exploring or playing with something in a networked body of individual cells, just like what you are. Like you know that that's the end of it. And that, being able to feel that and breathe that, that's where you're being in harmonious relationship with nature, with the environment, with, you don't have this like story of materialism and technological development. Pounding on the doors. So yeah, you don't have that, like even the book here is saying like how science and technology go together, and they kind of do, in the sense that science causes you to disassociate from what you're looking at. So you're studying, then that disassociation happens even at the psychological level. Like everybody's kind of losing their mind because of the scientific method that places the individual or the person doing science is right here. Nobody ever really thought that way in the past. People were initiated into this mystery at some point in their life, nearly universally. Like we're the first culture that doesn't reliably and expectedly initiate into this, right? So it just lets you're disassociated from the thing, so then you can take it and turn it into like whatever based on these needs. And it's like, I think that the world's like an interconnected organism, and it's like the whole thing, what you can perceive, is designed for you. That's what people meant. And that's not to say that it's not in a network of other cells, but you're designed for them and they're designed for you. It's not to say like this moment right here is definitely the most real thing. It's not that there's all this theory going out that's like, is the universe a simulation? And it's like, no. So that's the foundational science skill, and if you don't do it, you end up disassociated and without breath. Like this is a high stakes game. It's kind of a high stakes game, learning science. Because science is what lets you control the weather and build cars and you know, mine the coal, drill the oil, extract the lithium. You know, whatever we're doing, it's like, and it's always like this sense of separation of like, oh, I'm just gonna pull the lithium out. I'm just gonna pull the cadmium out because like I think that's better, than that causes another. Let's go pull this other thing out, and so it's this story of separation that's destroying the world. It's not necessarily science. Like you can understand all that is going on, and you can even understand all the experiments in science. Like we're gonna learn all the experiments in science, and we're gonna understand them probably even deeper than the scientist, because the scientist was doing the experiment from that delusional I thou perspective, and you can come to the thing of seeing like you can actually, by stepping into the true perspective, you see what the scientist was doing even better than the scientists themselves. No, what's going on? So, I think in all other states, like at all other times, like what I'm talking about is a little bit avant-garde. It'd say it's like, oh, it's woo, but it's like, no, this is just the conclusion that's been come to by like quantum mechanics. It's the theory behind it's the theory behind breath. It's like what you discover if you actually go inward. Like there's no reason to like pretend otherwise. And so you like, it's like in physics or in science, we're talking about the how and the why of everything. So like you need a how and a why of ha. You need a how and a why of aloha. You need a how and a why of like the self. And it's like, I don't, like this doesn't get rid of the mystery. It's like, it is laid out kind of like this. Like the body obviously contains, like we're obviously doing it from the body, but we also know that this is in the body. And that's true for every body. And so we know that we're looking at a reality that is a fractal network of cells within cells within cells. So like my cells are a community within like a universe that is a muscle belly. It's a particular type, and then they look out of that universe, and there's a whole universe of like my gallbladder and my spleen cells, and they have a particular telos. And my kidneys have a particular telos, and my skin has a particular telos. My you know, all the different cells in the body have this telos. So you look out and you see this thing, and the purpose and the reasoning is to serve the larger body that they're in, which is your body, because you're having a perception. So that's the way biology works, is that these worlds arise within the biology. It seems like this consciousness only happens inside of a water body. And like really, if you look at it on an even crazier level, all of those chemical reactions, all of the breath, all of the prana, everything is happening inside of water. All of the cells, all of the chemical reactions, everything that you would associate with the life force, like all of the nerve impulses, all of the metabolic stuff, all the blood, it's all in water. It's in a single body of water, like kind of separated by like loosey-goosey membranes, but it's one body of water that's in an infinite number of tubes and bags. That's all connected though. So all of that chemical reaction is happening in water, and we're looking at that chemical reaction, like that's what we're looking at. And then that's happening around like the structure. There's stuff in the body that's like not reacting, but pretty much everything in the body was under the chemical reactive life force of life at some point. Like there's nothing physical that wasn't biotic at one point, you know. And then the metabolism that's over the body changes quite a bit, and the body changes. So you know that you would see the world growing and changing over time. And then as individuals within the body, so like our cells grow, birth, and they die, and the cells turn over at a much faster rate than we overall age. Like all of the cells in the body, they go through an entire lifespan, like none of them are around after 7 years apparently. So you have a cellular turnover rate. So like we die at a much faster rate than we see the surrounding, like our actual body die. Like any individual is gonna have a faster clock time than the meta, and then it's just stacked. It's just we're in cells that are in a body that's on a planet, in a solar system, in a galaxy, and it's just a big loop. It's like infinity right here. And so that's just the objective big picture, and we can throw those like mind blows in there at any point. And it's like, I don't know what age that's appropriate for. Like what age is it appropriate to not be deluded? What age is it appropriate to have full breath? Which means like having those correct relationships, all of the forgiveness practices, all of the correct usages of love and aloha, all of the environmental practices, the connecting with the land, like all of that stuff, to have like at what age is that appropriate? Versus like being like the culture there's a culture that our culture is dependent on people sacrificing their breath in exchange for this like scientific power. We're kind of like doing it. So if you learn science wrong, if the materialism colonizes you, like if that I thou belief colonizes you, it does to your life force what you see technological development doing to the life force of the land. And it's like you kind of want to do it a little bit. You want a little bit, like you want this stuff, like it's awesome. You don't like the jungle, like the raw nature, the raw human is like powerfully unpleasant, just like deep jungle Africa. It's like it's not. So you want some of the science to tame it, but you want it to you don't want it to like overgrow and just turn everything into a computer, like a dead computer. So we're using it and everyone's doing it. So it's like, I think, and the degree to which we're using these screens to be telepathic with each other and to do all these other psychic powers of like remote viewing the past, like you are right now in the video, to be doing that stuff all the time, to be learning that way, it's like there's certain implications all of that stuff has on the mind and the body, and there's like basically best practices for doing that. They go a little bit deeper than whatever the responsible, right? There's responsible use of internet technology, right? So it's like we need to understand what the technology is doing, including the trance states. And so responsible use is to like, let's use the trance state for awesome. Like everyone knows like absurd stillness, right? So it's like if that's used and it's not used to enhance a dream state or to like escape, like for every power you have a temptation or a downside, right? So you have technological ability, and then that gives you the temptation to use it in a destructive, like an ecologically destructive way. And it's like the same thing with mental powers. As you become smart, the temptation for the mental thing is to go into a fantasy world, to actually, and you get these maniacal fantasies of actually entering into or bringing about your dream world. So that's people wanting to bring about utopia, or like when people start thinking like doomsday cults or utopian cults and stuff like that. It's all like getting sucked into the fantasy or the imagination, where lost my train of thought. Oh, yeah, that only happens if you're smart. Like the only way that you can get your dream world and stuff so rich that it starts to rival the real world is if you've reached a very, very high level of mental ability. And so with the aid of these cell phones, all of you have reached a very, very, very high level of mental ability. Like, when nobody like understands it unless you pursued this stuff, and I'm on the cusp. I was born like right as all this stuff happened. I'm kind of like a Xennial. I'm a little bit younger than Gen X. I'm a little bit older than a millennial. And so this stuff, like these what I call dreaming abilities, like imaginative abilities of like knowing, like being able to find anything that you would want to find, being able to know that anything that you would want to know through these mental journeys or these thought experiments of like basically the equivalent of like a YouTube Wikipedia hole or a Chat GPT. Like if you want to find something out, you can go on the internet and like research it and pull just tons of information. You used to be able to do that, but it was like through a little bit more magical synchronicities. You'd have to go to the library and bump into people, but if you put your mind to it, you could find out anything in a very rapid pace. Like once you figured it out, it was just like lightning connecting. But now with the Wikipedia and stuff like that, and the same thing with finding people that you vibe with or your friends and stuff like that. It used to be relatively somewhat difficult to get on the same wavelength, but you could do it, and it was just more of a physical skill. And now it's like you can text each other at any point, you can send messages at any point, you can be inside of each other's heads at any point. Like everybody is, you're so telepathically connected with everybody. It's insane. It's insane. It's crazy, and it's just normal to you. It's wild, and there's not many. You guys are the first ones to be like that way, and not that many. Not that many of the legacy people even have like a language or an understanding to even categorize what's happening. Most people don't think deeply enough to see like what is actually going on if you see everybody at that biological level. But yeah, what's going on is what's going on. And so the nihilistic thing where people think that there's no purpose, there's no telos, there's no anything, that's the same as getting cancer. Like that cells of cancer is cells in the body that are like going, we're just cells. There's no such thing as a body. And then they just go and do whatever. It's like, oh, it's just a forest. Like, oh, it's just oil. Oh, it's just lithium. Oh, it's just... And oh, it's just whatever XYZ, and there's no, and then it's like, and then you fight, and then people go, oh, well, let's not use anything, and just, it's like, well, what? No, what's the telos of it? What's the purpose of it? What's the purpose? There can't possibly be any purpose, and it's like that. Well, yeah, there's obviously a purpose. Because there's a purpose to the. It's maybe not a linguistic purpose, but the purpose of like the reason every cell in my finger is the way it is because of the finger, and it's doing all this, and then maybe the purpose beyond that is like that's impossible for me to even fathom. But I do know that within the structure of a body, and I know that I'm a living body because I'm alive, so it has kind of a purpose. And so yeah, that's kind of it. And then like as that breath turns on, like the thinking ability in terms of this physics stuff, like there's a phase transition to where it's like there's just some thinking, and that's the other thing I think might be a problem is you guys don't have to remember anything. I had to remember a ton of stuff until I was like 20. I had to write all this. I had to write stuff down. I had to take notes from books. I had to memorize phone numbers. Like I had to know all these formulas. Like we got maybe a note card. Like starting from a very young age, like I had to memorize stuff. And memorize all the states, all the presidents, all the country capitals. I don't know if do you guys even still do that? I just had to memorize a ton of stuff. And it's like maybe it's pointless to a certain point, but as you have a good memory, it lets you hold. That's the size of your memory is like the size of the chunks of information that you can move around when you're thinking. So like just because you memorize something doesn't necessarily mean that you're able to think. You could have just memorized the answer, but like memory as a skill, that like for whatever your memory size is like that's like imagine if you were trying to build a pyramid or something, and you were weak, so you could only lift 5 pounds. Each trip is just 5 pounds, and then as you get stronger, each trip can be, 500 pounds. Like that's the difference in mental strength in terms of developing memory. So if you get to a nice, big, robust, like shape, like memory-wise, which only comes from like you might as well like you have to pick a class and start memorizing poetry, start memorizing physics. Like you have to start memorizing something. Just so that you're not working in these tiny little bits of information. That you can't. It's so slow. It's just so slow. It's like what if there was a bunch of memory work as a foundation? What would be like a 2-step problem becomes like a 14-step problem just because the bandwidth. And it's a bandwidth for like everything. It's literally the same. Like imagine you're playing a first-person shooter and your graphics card isn't up to speed and it just lags. So like with the phone stuff and everything, having the stuff offloaded, like the mental processing speed seems to be dropping, and I think it's largely that memory thing. Like there's some other stuff that seems to be fast, but like I kind of feel thinking pretty, and I think like the discrepancy where it's like oh, what's going on is legit the memory. I think it's the same thing as not having enough RAM. If I was to say like what's making everybody slow in terms of the processing speed, because you guys seem to have like up to date CPUs in a sense, like you're there, like you're with it, you're like pretty smart, but in terms of being able to hand big conceptual chunks and stuff, it starts to grind to a halt, kind of like a computer with not enough RAM. So I don't know if you want to we could start memorizing vocabulary words or trying to do the tests. Like you just kind of have to study, otherwise you're going to be a little slow. Is all. I think that's the reality of it. So after working with everybody for a couple of weeks, like I think that's the low-hanging fruit in terms of addressing the general slowness of comprehension and of problem-solving ability. So those tests that I'm designing, like some students are getting done in like 5 minutes. And so I think the span between like the 5 minutes and like the 45 is I think it's all just kind of like, I would just write it off as memory, and it's not an individual's fault. I think we all suffer from it. My memory is terrible. I've been gifted and blessed with growing up like right at the cusp of having that old school upbringing, that old school education, which seems like an insane rigor by today's standards. So I'm just contrasting it to that, and so like to be honest, I do think us not having to remember anything is causing cognitive slowdown. And so that gets us to the like technology being the use of knowledge to repurpose natural material to create machines, devices, or systems that amplify personal power. So it's like we can look at these satellites and look at every single windstorm on the planet all at once at every single different level. And it's all visualized, and you can just say, yeah, it's free for everybody. Or you can see everything the sun is doing at any point, and you can see all the plasma distribution throughout the entire solar system, all for just free online. You can look at all the telescope data, you can look at all the seismic data is online for free. You can look at every earthquake everywhere, every earthquake, every location at every point in time. You can look at it, and so you can look at the sun while you're looking at the earthquakes, and all the other statistics are all out there. It's pretty wild. So technology definitely like opens up the mind to understand the larger system, because it's like this is so mysterious. Like if you really sit down and you try and like wrap your head around this just basic dissection and physiology proves that this is inside of me, including the stars. That vision of that up there, maybe it is up there, but the perception of it is all in me. And as I fly up there, the perception remains in me. So you see how like movement through space-time, since it's like an interconnected thing of bodies, it causes this toroidal movement to go anywhere. And that's assuming you can go, like I'm not even sure you could go anywhere. Like some things are not mobile. Like your cells don't move around in your body. The way that they go somewhere is to fall back into identity of going, you can relax your identity from being a finger cell and relax it into being this. So that's we all geek out about avatar state or whatever, right? The avatar state would be relaxing into your identity is of the body. Like every cell in my body has a right and a claim to like say they're me in a way, but you don't, that's if something comes up and does that, that's also insane cancer time or whatever, megalomania. So you're still, no matter what, you're just that, but you can get all that information, you know everything. You can perceive everything you would want to perceive about higher dimensional reality through the sense organs of your higher body. So you wouldn't necessarily like you wouldn't want to fly around to get, you wouldn't want to fly to a different planet or fly to a different area. That would, if you see how the people that want to do that and to travel that way are very enamored with the story of separation and the scientific materialism, where they're here, they're not that, and they've forgotten that they're in a connected body, that everything is one and everything is them and everything is interconnected in a fractal way. Not in a way that washes out the identity, like I'm not you. That's not what I'm saying at all. But our sense of space and time and everything is very mysterious and alive, basically. And there's like rules and patterns and behaviors the same way that you can know yourself when you learn how to ride a bike or surf. or like you reproduce. You can do all these different strategies of being, and then all of that contains the entirety of all of it. So like when you're doing science, like it's essentially you're studying yourself and your relationship to consciousness. And this is not new, it's not radical. This is entry level into every other cultural heritage on earth, and in alignment with the Hawaiian principles of breath to the best of my knowledge, because it is this interconnectedness, it is aloha, it is the recognition of self, the namaste. The Christ consciousness. And so that's the container. Like that has to be the container. Otherwise the science becomes delusional and you rot out the foundation. Like it rots out the health. You become unhealthy. And that's the stereotype of the mad scientist, or the population that does, the population as a whole that is a mad scientist. Like we work together. It's like how our class is only as good as whatever. You're basically humanity. Like you're in a class, a group of people, and it has a group of scientists that are doing this with this sense of separation. So you can see that everybody that has an I thou has adopted the scientific materialism that only happened in the Enlightenment 500 or 600 years ago. Before this, everybody was, they would call it kind of a dream space or Maya or whatever. Like before the science, the Enlightenment, like 500 years ago or whatever, everybody was aware of prana or breath, or it was just the assumed background. And then only with the advent of materialism has the story of separation really become so crystallized to where you're able to cause untold environmental destruction, and then even untold, like we're in the middle of like basically there's psychological operations going on from advertisers, from governments, from shadow organizations, from YouTube. Like everyone's constantly doing psychological warfare. Like they've used all of the study of human psychology, like we studied a lot last century, the mind, like what makes everybody tick, that's been weaponized. So like culture itself, psychology itself has been weaponized. With science, from taking that step back into that's not me over there, so that opens up these patterns of domination and just stuff to like a ridiculous degree. And it's always, this always happens, like you're always fighting this, and you're always having people and teachers kind of trying to reel the situation back in. The same way that you're kind of always fighting off aging or cancer or disease. Like the world's not perfect, so like the same thing infects, the same problems that happen to our body happen to society at large and happen to the universe at large. And there's also the same moments of like birth and death and reproduction and disease invasion and fighting at all these different levels. Like things are not stable, but also they're like infinitely stable. Like you can't get rid of humans. Like you can't really destabilize the picture as a whole. The fractal picture as a whole is like rock solid. Yeah, so science and technology can influence each other in positive and negative ways. The technology can make you dumber and rot out the base of stuff. Yeah, because you get tempted into the dream worlds, right? Went on a tangent there. So there's 3 branches of science: physical science, life science, earth and space science. And physical science is physics and chemistry. That's probably good, right? That's been like 40 minutes. We're good. We'll call that the intro video. So we got through. Anyway, I got to say it, so maybe I won't talk about it as much in class, right? But I do absolutely think it's important, to the best of my understanding. There's not a single standard in the, like the standards isn't like, make sure the children aren't deluded about XYZ phenomenon. Like nobody, like the textbooks don't even care.
It's like the only standard I care about, and it's not it's not on the Hawaii state standards. It's not on the federal standards. Like they don't care if you're like they just get the facts in them, or get them to have the ability, get them to have the facts. But nobody cares if we're deluded or not. Nobody cares if you're a Howley, right? Breathless. It's such a perfect word. It's what it does. It's scientific materialism divorces you from your breath and it makes you breathless. And so that's why they called these materialistic people caught up in this stuff breathless. It's like, it's genuinely the Hawaiians have the best words for everything. It's the island thing, like it's like the most pure, it's pure. Like everybody had it going on, but like they only got, it was, I don't want to call it dead or whatever, but like the same thing happened to the Hawaiians that happened to all of us. Like this culture and this technology just comes in and it like subsumes you, but they lasted a very long time relative to everybody else. Like that European culture died out in whatever, 1500s. And it's not to say cultures were perfect or whatever or anything, but they weren't. It wasn't breathless. There wasn't a separation. There wasn't this like massive disassociation that's happened from science and the rejection of there being a telos or the rejection of there being a narrative. And that's why everyone continues to make like these comparisons of humanity as like a cancer or a plague or a virus on the earth. And it's like, no, we just sort of have those things metaphysically. We kind of like, that's why the cancer rates are so high in general, because the meta being has cancer. Humanity as a whole has cancer. That's why the mental illnesses are so high. Like humanity as a whole has a mental illness. Like we have we're not a virus, we have viruses. We're not a parasite, we have parasites. A lot of people probably have parasites. Anyway.